Meet Lin, the main character of our story, and right now he's hella lonely. His brother Song vanished 5 years ago. 2 years later, they declared him dead. The guys had been tight since they were kids, and 3 years after that, the brother's mom passed away too, never getting over losing her favorite son. Friends and relatives felt for Lin and had his back, but honestly couldn't really get what he was going through. Even after his mom died, he didn't give up on finding his brother, throwing all his energy into the search. But neither the printed flyers nor any other methods helped Jack. There was zero word about Song. One day, when despair finally got the best of Lin, he ditched his attempts and signed up for the army. After getting discharged, Lin came back to their old place. Sorting through family stuff, he found a box with a photo and an antique watch. Lin thought that was pretty damn curious, since back in the day he'd given Song that watch when he was taking his final exams. Lin got lost in thought, remembering how he'd explained to his brother that the watch, though it looked ancient, was super accurate and reliable. Song kinda laughed at the gift, especially when he saw that the engraver had screwed up his last name, Han, instead of Hyun. Lin was bummed out then. He wanted to give the perfect gift, and this was such a letdown. That hack of a craftsman was gonna catch hell. Now Lin remembered how his brother had looked at him back then and promised that no matter what, it was the best gift of his life. Suddenly, it was like an audio recording of Song's voice went off in Lin's head. He couldn't believe his own ears. Clearly, a hallucination. But it was totally clearly saying that he wasn't in our world anymore and he'd gone searching for medicine for Mom. It started with a text offering to participate in a race, the prize, granting a wish, for Song, curing his mother. Hoping he could help his mom, the guy doesn't think twice before replying yes to an obvious spam message. From that moment, the dude started having incredibly realistic dreams about gnomes, elves, dragons, and another dimension. Right in the center of this mysterious world rises a magical obelisk with insane power. Whoever makes it to the top of the stele gets divine powers, plus an elixir of living water that cures all diseases. After that, Song's life looked more like a medieval chronicle. Just dates, events, and one goal he's ready to do anything for. Song put together a team to climb to the top of the obelisk together. Training ate up all his free time. After 6 months, the guy realized that to reach his goal, he needed to dedicate himself completely to the task. In January, he leaves our reality and moves into the obelisk world. June 2015, Song's team Atrium takes leading positions. In February, our hero gets enough experience to determine the timeline for conquering the stele. One more year of prep. A year later, Atrium gets into open conflict with the supreme clan of the obelisk world. Another 6 months later, conquering the stele gets postponed. War with the indigenous population broke out. November 29, 2018. The war is won. 2 years later, it seemed like nothing could stop Song from reaching the peak of the obelisk now, but he falls in love. In July, military clashes resume with renewed force. The battles are getting more and more brutal. Next 3 months, the fighting goes back and forth. Neither side manages to get the upper hand. Really tough. 2 months later, Atrium starts getting torn apart by internal contradictions. Unity is broken. Mutual trust is done for. In October of that same year, Song is poisoned by his inner circle. Strength is gradually leaving him. Life is slowly fading. Soon after, Atrium falls apart, betrayal everywhere. September, Song's lover plunges a dagger into his chest. 2 weeks later, Song remains the only member of Atrium. He already knows the way to the goal, and this path is clear. In the end, Song has one wish left before heading to a better world. Gotta get the elixir for Mom. And his brother will definitely hear Song. He'll find this recording, he'll manage to get into the obelisk world and grab the precious medicine. Lin kept winding the watch over and over, and Song's voice recording repeated too. Get the elixir for... Finally, Lin made up his mind. He's gotta find out Song's fate. He'd already lost his mom, was sure he'd lost his brother too, and now there's a chance. Turns out the inhabitants of the magical dimension have some weird power and abilities, Lin thought. Again and again, the guy replayed his brother's audio recording, each time trying to find clues and hints about the obelisk world. But when it came to the war, Song's bloodied face would flash before Lin. His thoughts got all jumbled. Blood running down Song's face, the cold look in his dark eyes. Lin wanted to believe in a miracle, wanted to believe his brother was alive. Lin's body started shaking and sweat broke out on his face, but he'd already made his final decision and headed to the computer. He wasn't surprised to see a folder on the desktop that wasn't there before and started creating a character in the obelisk world. Clutching the watch in one hand, Lin controlled the mouse with the other. Thoughts about Song's fate made it hard to focus. He needed to concentrate. Meanwhile, Lin's character was already being actively created. Physical stats and abilities loaded, appearance, skills. Then the character's receptors and skills started loading. A window popped up to determine the player's character. Lin thought about it. Cold-bloodedness will come in real handy, Lin decided, and for his ability, he chose resistance to hypnosis. As a unique gift, Dragon's Eye, the ability to detect lies and see the basic skills of whoever he's talking to. Info was added that as a bonus, Lin's character was granted heightened all 5 senses. And then, the last info window appeared on screen. There's a gift for him from another player, something like an inheritance. The next instant, an image of the antique watch filled the whole monitor with the inscription, "Granted clairvoyance." So, the creation of Lin's digital self was complete. He sort of snapped out of it like from a dream, still clutching the magical gift, those precious antique watches. Next to him was Song's photo. He probably wished his brother well, but Lin had no doubt that the upcoming adventure was going to bring him a ton of hardships and deprivation. Now that the decision was made, Lin wrapped up all his current business and got ready to move to the obelisk world. Now, all the stuff he'd need going forward had to fit in one backpack. Since Lin had served in the army, he was used to all his belongings being just what's in his pack. Even though he'd lost everyone dear to him, leaving his familiar life behind was still pretty rough. The backpack fit some clothes, hygiene stuff, food, a set of knives he'd used in the army. Would have been nice to bring a gun too, but that's too much, Lin decided. Dressed in comfy sweats, pulling a cap on his head, Lin looked more like a teenager. Hard to see in this guy someone ready to put his life on the line. After finishing all the prep, Lin headed to the city park. Even though the opening round started a week ago, he knew he could still jump into the game and get a pretty good start. And sure enough, soon a portal opened in the middle of the park lawn, leading Lin to his new life. He knew you could activate such an entrance using Song's watch. Full of determination, Lin boldly stepped through the open door. Now the people who betrayed Song would pay for everything. His figure sharply cut through the stream of light breaking through the portal. From this moment on, he's Ju Chung, a warrior. Opening his eyes after the blinding light, Chung realized he'd ended up on the first level of the obelisk world. So, his ascent to the top had begun. How many trials await him, Lin thought. The starting section of the young man's path ran through tunnels, something like a sewer system in our cities. Gotta stay alert. Danger could be anywhere. Cheng already knew that before climbing the stele, he had to prove his strength, show the magical obelisk, even before ascending, that he's basically capable of conquering it. He also knew that on the upper floors, already approaching the top, were former comrades from Atrium who betrayed his brother. Those are exactly who he needs to not only catch up to, but overtake. Revenge for his brother and completing all the goals set not even by Lin himself, or rather Chung now, but by Song. The noble brother wanted to save their mom. Shame it's not meant to be anymore. The task before Lin was insane. He had to surpass in just a few months the years of progress of the obelisk world's old-timers. Chung reached into his backpack. The guy pulled out a white mask and put it on his face. He had to become the most successful conqueror of the stele world, and for that, he needed to stack up advantages from the start of the journey. Hearing approaching footsteps, Chung got ready to fend off an attack. Armed with 2 daggers, he got into position and waited for his debut opponent. However, the first fight wasn't meant to happen. A creature resembling a classic goblin appeared before Lin. Most surprising wasn't even the goblin himself, but his outfit and manners. The goblin, dressed in a tailcoat, introduced himself, said his name was Ibagasa, and he was the caretaker of the first level of the obelisk world's passage zone. He carried himself dignified and majestic. Lin tried to figure out whether this meeting was planned or the goblin randomly ended up in his path. After thinking for a few seconds, he concluded that Ibagasa didn't just show up for nothing. Confirming Lin's hunch, the goblin announced that he'd now familiarized the newbie with some features and rules of their world. On the first level under his control, Ibagasa began. There are 7 stages total. Points are awarded for completing tasks on each one. The player moves forward if after clearing all stages they've managed to rack up enough points. At the end of transitioning from the first level to the second, the player gets a reward, also depending on the number of points scored. The more points, the sweeter the prize, obviously. Lin asked the goblin what phase his stage was at right now. In response, Ibagasa said that most players had moved to level C and had been on it for about a week. Then, it was Ibagasa's turn to ask questions. He asked if Chung was ready to jump into the race or would wait another week or two and join the new group of players from the start. Cheng, understanding how far away and even unreachable his rivals already were, answered without a shadow of doubt that he's starting now, no hesitation whatsoever. The goblin continued to clue Chung in on the intricacies of the obelisk world structure. He reported that although usually everyone creates teams, the levels are set up so that each person's point count is determined solely by their own work. Accordingly, if Chung manages to complete tasks solo, he'll be able to earn enough points to let him advance rapidly. This will not only get him tons of prize artifacts as rewards for showing courage and smarts, but will also attract viewer sympathy. These are exactly the kind of players that are most interesting to watch. They always go one of two ways, either shoot up to become leaders fast or die just as fast. More often the latter. If he's ready, he can start the trial right now. It'll be curious to watch his progress. After that, the goblin announced the start of the trial, snapped his fingers, bowed out, and vanished. Chang was left in the tunnel alone. He looked around and gripped his knife tighter, understanding that he was living through the last relatively peaceful minutes of his life in the obelisk world. The guy's foot stepped over the starting line. He entered level A. Amazing feelings overwhelmed Lin, who'd become Chung for this world, knowing that now his path lay only forward. So, Block A, in it, according to the assignment, you had to disable all the traps. The audio recordings mentioned a bunch of traps in this phase, but said nothing about their location. So Chang understood that the key to success at this stage should be caution. He slowly moved forward. Phantom sounds reached his ears, as if the ghosts of past players were around him. Lin stopped and took the backpack off his back. Covering himself with it like a shield, he continued forward. His intuition didn't fail him. The next instant, a whole hail of arrows plunged into the backpack. The thick fabric stopped the deadly arrows. The clairvoyance granted as an ability had already paid off 100%, Chung thought. The backpack, pierced with arrows, looked like a hedgehog that had its quills yanked out. Chung thought he almost became a pincushion, and only a couple minutes had passed in the Stele world. The next thought that struck Chung's consciousness like lightning was a firm conviction in the necessity of sticking close to the walls of the narrow tunnel corridor. Chang didn't so much feel as rather comprehend pain. At the same time, his consciousness was entirely occupied with thoughts related to further advancement through the level. Seems like he'd developed pain tolerance. At a certain point, Chung's body was pierced by multiple arrows, but this didn't stop him from being focused at all. He experienced his individual trait in action: cold-bloodedness. With such abilities, he started to truly believe that he could reach the top of the stele. The control over himself he demonstrated was mind-blowing. He got curious whether his body would react just as restrained to any damage. He pulled a lighter from his pocket, tore a sheet from a notebook, and crumpled it into a ball. Chang cauterized the wounds, but this time felt no pain at all. The notification system issued a message that his movement was slowed. Lin continued studying his new self. Then the system notified that Chung had developed immunity to burns, and his movement speed was restored. Lin kept moving while maintaining maximum concentration. He caught himself thinking that all the arrows had flown at him simultaneously, and this was preceded by the click of some mechanism. Gotta listen for the slightest noise. If he can hear and react to the sound in time, then he'll manage to dodge or block the arrows. The main thing, don't take any damage this time. Chang concentrated maximally on his heightened senses. The system again announced notifications. Hearing was improved, touch also increased. And so our hero really made an important discovery. Following the unmistakably recognized sound, his gaze shot up to the tunnel ceiling. Literally, a fraction of a second was all it took to make a decision. Chung acted like lightning, relying on his outstanding instincts. Not even a moment passed before the dagger had entered the ceiling all the way to the hilt. The throwing knife, skillfully thrown by Chung, disabled the mechanism launching the arrows, and they rained down on the tunnel floor with a ringing echo. He felt a surge of strength, and a new notification from the system didn't keep him waiting. Intuition increased. Chung noted a pattern. The skill he used to neutralize the arrows grew. Confirming his guess, the next second Chung dodged an arrow with a blue tip. The agility parameter increased. Then our hero deflected a red arrow with his dagger. The system immediately announced an increase in strength. And the yellow arrow, the now more experienced Chung straight up caught mid-flight, proving his endurance. Chung didn't even suspect that the very experienced Ibagasa's close attention was now fixed on him. He noted with pleasure for himself the remarkable ingenuity of the debutante. The goblin understood this was just the beginning, but the way Chung's brain worked, how skillfully he used his abilities, spoke of the new player's great potential. Ibagasa concluded that such a turn of events couldn't help but please. It had been a long time since such an extraordinary player had entered the obelisk world. The guy could aim high. Gotta keep an eye on him. Chang, meanwhile, had reached the end of the tunnel. The completion of the first trial was crowned by a heavy double door and a hologram monitor located nearby. Approaching it, Chung could check out the growth of his characteristics based on the results of the completed level. He considered the result good, but not outstanding. Mental fortitude, strength, endurance, speed indicators increase. Progress. Of course that's great, but the main thing is the experience and knowledge accumulated in the process of completing the level. The next instant, Chung's thoughts were interrupted by new sensations. Pleasant warmth spread through his body, and outside a healing golden aura enveloped him. Wounds were healing. As if drowning in the pleasant bliss of regeneration, the young man slowly slid to the floor. Consciousness was leaving Chung, but he didn't feel the slightest danger, so he relaxed and surrendered to the will of the game. Slowly coming to, our hero gradually regained sensitivity, now become his formidable weapon. Chung's gaze opened to a person in a monk's robe standing near him. That one, seeing that Chung had finally come to, threw his hands forward in a stopping and calming gesture. Like, no need to worry, he poses no danger. But Chung didn't quite understand why he ended up in the same gloomy tunnel and moreover sprawled right on the cold floor. He instinctively started crawling away from the stranger. Then Chung pulled himself together, calmed down, and activated his extrasensory abilities. The worry turned out to be unnecessary. This person wasn't a monk at all, but, on the contrary, a merchant, and there's no reason to fear him, at least for now. The system message didn't keep him waiting long either. It notified Chung that merchants are an integral part of the game, and their services are available in the intervals between levels. The merchant, meanwhile, had already started introducing Chung to his assortment: food, potions, weapons, and most importantly, artifacts, any client whim at the fairest price. Yeah, no matter how different the obelisk world was from ours, merchants here were just as shady, Chung thought, studying the purchases available to him, always trying to rip you off. Soon, the hero's thoughts were consumed by the torment of choice. Artifacts are valuable, but very expensive. Other purchases aren't practical, which means he needs to focus on skills, Chung decided. Here, Chung's eyes gleamed cunningly. He found what he was looking for. A question followed to the merchant. What does he accept as payment? The answer didn't surprise the young man at all. Of course, ability points. Cheng stated that this transaction format suits him. He's ready to exchange his abilities for a ticket that will let him teleport to the very beginning of the level and go through it again. Having voiced his choice, Chung struck a victor's pose. Even the mask on his face didn't hide his triumph, while the merchant was somewhat taken aback. Looks like our hero took the first step toward hacking the system. The merchant wouldn't be a merchant if he didn't quickly pull himself together. He said that the return ticket is far from the most common choice, but Chung is free to buy exactly that if he wishes. Usually, players prefer to move forward, satisfied with what they'd already acquired. This guy's made of different stuff, the merchant thought, smirking. He'll make a worthy contender. Grinning slyly, the merchant instructed Chung on how to use the ticket, thanked him for the fruitful cooperation, and disappeared, as if by the wave of a magic wand. And Chung heard the already familiar system notification reporting that all the characteristic points he'd earned on the previous level were removed, but a return ticket was added to his inventory. Chung himself felt that strength, skills, and abilities literally left him. He looked at his hands. From them, like a spirit rushing to the other world, his skills evaporated. But this didn't scare the hero. After all, experience and knowledge hadn't gone anywhere. He took the ticket in his hands and tore it in the middle. The artifact started emitting the same golden glow as before losing consciousness. At the completion of the level, Chung realized that teleportation to the beginning of the trial would happen now. And so Cheng is at the very start of the first level, in the sewer tunnel already perfectly familiar to him. I think I'll manage the second time faster and better. That's how the young man cheered himself up. Remembering perfectly the location of the traps, Chung overcame the first part of the trial completely unobstructed, without even taking the backpack off his back. Further on, though the arrows made Chung sweat, he did way better than the first time, earning more characteristic points and finishing the run much faster. The young man was especially pleased with leveling up the Dragon's Eye ability, since this unusual property gave him a hell of a lot of advantages. When using the Dragon's Eye, the tunnel corridor turned into a two-dimensional model as if drawn on a sheet of paper. Now, nothing could hide in its dark corners. Living creatures nearby looked like the same two-dimensional blueprints. Chung remembered that Song had talked about this phenomenon in the recordings, calling it Fan. And so for the second time, Chung finds himself near the reinforced door, ending the completion of the first level. 2 hours had passed since the start of the trial. Last time he'd managed in 10 hours. The skills at the same time grew noticeably more than during the first experience. Chung was satisfied with the progress, and most importantly, with the fact that he'd found an unusual and creative solution that allowed him to achieve the optimal result. At the same time, Chung was perfectly aware that he was just a bright debutante. The real contenders for conquering the obelisk are far ahead, and catching up to them is practically impossible. Occupied with these thoughts, he heard a message notifying him that he'd entered the level boss room. He absolutely had to get through levels A and B in one push today. He resolutely pulled his daggers from their sheaths and rushed forward through the tunnel. For now, he decided to rely on skills, saving the eye ability for later phases of the level. Although he had grown in his abilities, with the appearance of fire arrows, he had to work at the limit of his capabilities. After all, they not only burned, but also moved faster than regular ones. Having successfully dealt with the improved arrows, Chung almost fell into a new trap. The smooth tunnel floor suddenly dropped off sharply, and an abyss unexpectedly appeared before the young man's feet. Reacting in time to the new obstacle, Chung managed to overcome it in one jump. Flying over the abyss, he saw that its bottom was studded with sharp stakes, meaning he'd been a hair's breadth from death. The treacherous obstacle behind him, it served as an excellent reminder that in the obelisk world, even a second of relaxation is deadly. Chung continued on without losing concentration. His vigilance turned out to be useful and was soon rewarded with a new discovery. In the ceiling, he noticed a moving slab, obviously exactly where new troubles should be expected from. And sure enough, a couple seconds later, the ceiling block shifted to the side and a powerful jet of fire struck the place where our hero had been a moment ago. For some time, Chung managed to deftly avoid the fire traps. Moving in spurts through the narrow corridor, the young man each time turned out to be more attentive and nimbler than the devious mechanisms. But at some point, Chung slowed down, stopped, and collected his thoughts. After thinking, he decided to test out the invulnerability to the fire element he'd gotten on the previous level. And now the player is already stepping through the thickness of fire. Chung's calculation turned out to be correct. He took no damage, and bypassing the solid wall of flame at the finish didn't seem possible at all. Chung understood that level B was almost complete. All that remained was to deal with the boss. And then a metal robot appeared before him, a real Tin Man, the former Lin would have thought. This is the gatekeeper guarding the entrance to the recovery room, Chung recalled Song's instructions. The robot completely copies the player's skills, as if being his copy, but faster and stronger. According to Song, you can deal with it in two ways, either outplay it by moving unconventionally for yourself, or find a weak spot in its armor using the Dragon's Eye. Cheng decided to play it safe and activated his unique ability. Even if nothing works out, he'd have a second attempt in a head-on clash with the robot. But first, he'll try to win without much bloodshed. The robot gradually acquired characteristic outlines for Chung, appearing before him as a pencil sketch. The flow of time seemed to slow down. Chang already clearly sees the vulnerability in the Guardian's body. The weak spot is right in the center of the chest. Pretty straightforward, just like in a human, he thought at that moment. Chung-Yi knew not only the gatekeeper's weak spot, but also the robot's operating principle. It moved reacting to sensor signals. Yeah, the information passed on by Song was priceless. Understanding that the robot would copy him and anticipating the Guardian's every move, Chung managed and delivered a crushing blow with his dagger to the gatekeeper's vulnerable spot. Clean work. Cheng could be proud of himself. He made no mistakes, was precise and attentive. Only one circumstance escaped him. An unnoticed spectator was watching the duel with admiration. In the dust settling after the duel with the gatekeeper, Chung's fit figure was outlined. The girl, not taking her eyes off him, continued to analyze the details of the duel. But Chung also sensed someone's presence next to him. He turned sharply and was literally 2 steps away from the stranger. She was amazed by his speed again. However, not flustered at all, she quickly started a dialogue with Chung. The first thing that interested the girl was how he knew that the Guardian navigates by sensors. She could see perfectly well that Chung showed no aggression and was generally open to conversation, so she immediately got down to business and without even bothering to introduce herself, started firing off new questions. The flow of her thoughts had to be interrupted by Chung himself. He asked the girl to tone it down a bit and ask questions in order. The stranger started more calmly now. Chang explained to her the nature of his abilities. He said he saw how the gatekeeper was entwined with energy flows and understood what it used to orient itself in space. And immediately seizing the initiative in the conversation, he started asking his own questions. First, he stunned the girl with the guess that she too possessed certain skills. This was obvious from the nature of her questions. Now, it was the young stranger's turn to be amazed by her new companion's insight. A bit reluctantly, but she didn't dodge the answer, confirming Chung's suspicions. So the young people conducted a kind of game with each other. Neither of them wanted to share their secrets, but each sought to find out the interlocutor's mysteries. Spy games. Cheng claimed that he only sensed magic, but didn't wield it. In response, the girl noted that personally, she strongly doubted the possibility of defeating the gatekeeper without knowing how to use magic. To herself, she thought, what is Chung capable of when he playfully defeats the Guardian just by sensing magical flows? After all, in just a few rushes, he literally destroyed a formidable opponent. Cheng turned his back to his interlocutor, stating that now he'd open the exit from the level. At the same moment, he quite unexpectedly asked a question, addressing directly the player's personality. Fractions of a second before this, Chung's eyes acquired a golden gleam, which indicated his use of extrasensory abilities. The information he received was quite curious. He asked why for their character they chose such an image and gender. After all, the player themselves is a boy, moreover, a boy of about 10. And most importantly, let them finally introduce themselves. Caught off guard, the young player was forced to show his cards. He explained that the image is primarily camouflage, plus girls are always underestimated, and his name is Yuki. And having already started talking about himself, Yuki's character continued. He revealed that he also sees magic. Flows of magical energy are colored for him in different colors depending on their nature. Cheng, having carefully listened to Yuki, suggested that such an ability could have been passed down to the boy by inheritance at the genetic level. He'd heard of similar cases. Amazingly, Cheng hit the nail on the head. Yuki told him that his parents from early childhood explained to him how to use his unique gift and possessed it themselves too. The guys followed the corridor leading to the level exit door like old pals. They really did have a lot in common. Gradually, Cheng began to develop his thought. He drew a parallel with Song's ability. Complete adaptation. It allowed him to master new and sometimes completely alien to his nature skills very quickly. This also applied to working with magic, which Song, being an earthling, mastered to perfection. He could also create magical, eternal things, which he also masterfully used. This was precisely the reason why the ancient dragon Boreal granted the unique eye ability to Song, and he in turn passed it on to Cheng. Yuki said that Cheng's brother was a kind of genius since he managed to master magic. He himself sees it only as flows of energy, like a river current rushing to its channel. Curious comparison, Cheng thought, but then he was distracted from this thought as a system message sounded announcing the crediting of karma, points to him for completing the level. The travelers found themselves right in front of the level gates. Cheng continued to ponder his achievements. Karma, the main game asset and currency, but already in settlements between players. So ability points can be used to pay merchants providing organizers, and karma to settle accounts within the player community. With this thought, Cheng opened the gates. His gaze presented a huge platform in the middle of high walls. The structure resembled a Roman forum. Groups of many people were scattered all around the perimeter. Some of them were repairing and fixing their cold weapons. Others were trying to heal terrible wounds. Many cripples who'd lost limbs were sitting on concrete seats. Stopping at the entrance, Cheng turned to Yuki and suggested going to the forum together and thus moving to the next level of the game accordingly. Yuki couldn't believe such a generous offer. God only knows how much time the kid had to languish in the corridors of the second stage, not having the strength to deal with the gatekeeper. Right at the entrance, the heroes were met by a bunch of young people. They stared intently at Yuki. She also looked at them carefully, and this look didn't promise anything good. Seeing his companion's worried face, Cheng realized that something connected her with these people. However, he didn't have to wonder long. It turned out this was Yuki's former team. They continued the conversation already seated in the forum stands. The conversation again went into discussing magic. Yuki developed the idea that the innate ability to see it is both a gift and a curse. Cheng listened carefully. To his surprise, Yuki's judgments were not at all childish, and he managed to get quite a large amount of relevant and useful information from him. Yuki finished with a question about Cheng's further plans. Of course, he expected that he planned to conquer the top of the stele, but hearing this in reality, was amazed by his comrade's ambitions. Yuki himself, realizing the limitations of his capabilities, wasn't going to move further, understanding that his time hadn't come yet. He said he'd exit the game before the new stage. With that, the guys started saying goodbye. Cheng moved toward the opposite gates of the forum, and Yuki remained in place, seeing off his comrade with his gaze and actively waving goodbye. Right before the exit, Cheng, who hadn't taken off his mask once during his entire stay at the forum, turned sharply and called out to Yuki. Once a presentable man in a traveling cloak approached Yuki's former teammate's company. He said he'd been watching them for a long time and noticed great prospects in them. The stranger introduced himself. He said his name was Bill, and he represented Team Ararog, and if they managed to overcome Block B, getting into the recovery zone, they could join their team. Having announced this offer, Bill majestically departed, leaving the guys to vigorously discuss their new prospects. After all, Ararog is one of the leading teams. Becoming part of it is any newbie's dream. And now we see a fierce battle with a whole group of gatekeepers. Yuki's team is being pushed back. The Guardians clearly have the initiative, working clearly and smoothly. Yuki herself, armed with a small dagger, supports her team from the rear. In this fight, the guys can't organize coordinated actions and productively use her skills. Their team continues to retreat, and now everyone is bunching up. Their combat formation is broken. Someone's strong hand grabs Yuki by the scruff and throws her back sharply. A moment later, Yuki finds herself on the cold dungeon floor, hearing the ragged breathing of fleeing comrades. A group of gatekeepers approaches the defenseless girl. We find ourselves at the forum again. We can observe an angry and agitated Yuki, surrounded by former friends. She's animatedly telling them something. The others stand with downcast eyes and humbly listen to the young girl, not only realizing their guilt before her, but also understanding what the publicity of their flight in the tunnel could lead to. The group's leader humbly bows his head, once again uttering apologies. He personally told Bill about Yuki's heroic sacrifice, covering the team's retreat in the battle with the Guardians. And here she stands safe and sound in the middle of the forum and loudly scolds her former teammates for cowardly flight, accusing them of betrayal. With such a reputation, they won't stay in Otterog. So, it's necessary to make Yuki's supposed death real, he thought, watching the agitated girl leave, especially since she never promised to keep her mouth shut. The first time it was hard to decide to abandon her, betraying again is much easier. Can't let this snotty kid stand in their way. Team membership cost them enormous effort. Gotta decide right now, while no one sees them. Meanwhile, Yuki was slowly moving away from her offenders. Not even thinking of looking back, she was still bursting with anger and resentment. And the ringleader was already moving toward the defenseless girl, the distance between them rapidly decreasing, while he smoothly pulled his sword from its sheath. Literally, in a second, the picture changed dramatically. No one could really understand what happened. Only before the villains, a person with a dagger and in a mask appeared as if out of nowhere. He stated that he wouldn't allow dirty betrayal to happen again, and the blood dripping from his dagger blade eloquently declared that these words should be taken seriously. The same fate befell Song when he was at the very top of the obelisk. Chung was overwhelmed with anger, and in his imagination the image of his bloodied brother surfaced again. The other traders also grabbed their surroundings. They couldn't understand how Chung managed to sneak up on them so unnoticed, and when he managed to wound their leader. The villain's thoughts were interrupted by Kyle's desperate scream. He, forgetting about his wounded hand, in a fit of rage rushed at Chung. Despite the surprise effect, his desperate attacks were easily repelled. The fight promised Kyle nothing good. After a few seconds he was disarmed, and Chung squeezed his healthy hand in an iron grip, completely paralyzing the opponent's movements. Sinister lights danced in Chung's eyes. Grinding his teeth, he squeezed out a threat, said that he who strikes in the back should always expect a blow to his own. Not fully realizing the opponent's strength, the traders, still holding their drawn swords at the ready, demanded to immediately release Kyle, otherwise Chung himself would be in trouble. In response, Chung stated that they probably didn't fully realize the complexity of the situation. He accuses them of attempted murder, so they'd better voluntarily drop their weapons and accept punishment themselves. To clearly demonstrate the seriousness of his own intentions, Chung twisted Kyle's blocked arm, making it clear to the henchmen their ringleader is completely in his power. Kyle's face distorted with a grimace of horror, and his frantic scream demanding to obey Chung's orders completely deprived his comrades of their last desire to resist. Bewilderment and powerlessness could be read on the traitors' faces, and their leader, who a couple days ago was bragging about his incredible prospects, was defeated and broken by Chung in a matter of seconds. Immobilized, he lay in the dust. Not a trace remained of his former determination and arrogance. Now he could only dream not of a career in Otterog, but of staying out of jail. Cheng proceeded to deal with the rest of the gang. The one standing closest to him, he knocked down with a crushing side punch. He didn't even realize that revenge had already begun. The second was hit by a sweeping uppercut, immediately depriving him of balance and knocking him on his back. They had absolutely nothing to oppose Chung's speed and strength. The remaining two glanced at each other angrily, deciding to act together. They realized they were cornered, and there would be no mercy, so they prepared for resistance. Chain seemed to be participating in a slow-motion video. That's how much faster than his opponents he moved, and with such ease predicted their intentions and actions. Having drawn his daggers, Chung rushed at his opponents. Knowing about his huge advantage in cold weapon handling skills, he understood that he wouldn't have to kill the opponents. It was enough just to immobilize them by inflicting targeted wounds, which happened almost from the very beginning of the fight. Within seconds, Chung's daggers were stained with the blood of the unlucky opponents. Those already familiar with Chung's abilities weren't surprised at all by such an outcome. But what happened next became a surprise. A stream of some unknown light liquid hit the guys' faces. Its action resulted in the two young people ending up on the ground unconscious. Their mouths and eye sockets were completely filled with that same mysterious substance. Yuki enthusiastically watched from the side as her defender dealt with the cocky punks. Chung wasn't much older, but how much more mature in judgments and actions. In parting, Chung told Yuki to be more careful when choosing friends and advised her to definitely visit the botanical garden of Tertia someday. She didn't even have time to find out what kind of garden it was before Chung had already left. But now both Yuki's character and his young owner knew for sure who they wanted to be like in the future. Not far from the place of recent events, a curious couple settled on the stone stands, a tall guy with burgundy hair and a slender, pretty blonde. The girl was sound asleep right on the steps, but a second later quickly grabbed herself from her companion's push and was now puzzledly rubbing her sleepy eyes. Realizing there was no danger or urgent rush, she relaxed a bit and stretched evenly. But still, Why did he need to wake her up? Probably something curious happened. Her partner, realizing that she'd finally woken up from sleep, told how Chung single-handedly dealt with Yuki's offenders and reported that he'd also completely overcome level A solo. The blonde asked if these were the same show-offs who were going to join Ararog, and learning that they were exactly those, the girl knowingly chuckled. Won't they want revenge? She wondered. Out loud, the girl suggested that this Chung is probably super cool if he's going through the game solo, and she wouldn't mind having such a traveling companion on the next level. The redhead replied that nothing stops them from offering him their company. The girl was skeptical of this idea, but didn't object. The temptation to get such a strong ally was too great. At the same time, Chung was already at the start of level B in front of 4 entrance doors. Each door determined not only the difficulty of completion, but also the level of potential reward. Chang pondered tactics, save strength and time by taking the path of least resistance, then use the trick from level A, or start with a difficult stage with a rich reward. Song chose the blue door, second in difficulty. Knowing this, Chung stopped at the most difficult black one. Passing through it promised as a prize the vampiric blade of Burton. Opening the door, he plunged into thoughts about what might await him inside. Intuition suggested that level B would be completely different from the first, and he'd have to sweat hard. Already at the end of the first corridor, Chung entered a huge hall with high ceilings and a pond in the middle. The system prompted that the water in the lake was unusual and didn't form naturally. Chang understood that the trials begin with this water barrier. He kicked the pebble hard. It traced a beautiful arc and dove into the middle of the pond. The pebble didn't sink in the mysterious lake, but began to quickly dissolve in the liquid with a loud hiss. This water won't be easy to overcome. Gotta find a way around. Chang concentrated and activated his unique ability. His eyes lit up with a golden gleam again, and consciousness seemed to rush to new horizons. The solid walls of the hall turned into familiar two-dimensional blueprints. The place revealing the secret passage was chaotically hatched. Chung put his hand on the pressure panel, and instead of a blank wall, a secret passage through the wall opened before him. The panel covering the entrance slowly went underground with a creak. The way forward was open. Right from the entrance, a steep spiral staircase went down, just as old and monumental as the entire level. A message sounded. The path to the Hall of Eternal Cold and Darkness is open. Then another message. The player was credited with credit points for discovering a secret passage. Chung continued to descend. He was literally all turned into his senses. At the end of the descent, Chung's gaze presented a wall all overgrown with unusual white mold. It has unusual properties. It will make a few stronger. The rest, it'll simply poison. Most people eat ordinary food. It doesn't contain the necessary substances to activate the properties of white mold. They simply won't absorb it. It'll cause pain and vomiting. To use its true capabilities, a special diet is needed. Song revealed this secret and passed his knowledge to his brother. Here, Chung had a certain advantage. And creatures that consume white mold constantly, those whose main food it is, mutate. They acquire an incredible ability to absorb the energy of night. However, the main discovery was different, an even more incredible observation. In combination with water from the pond in the previous gallery, white mold multiplies human muscles many times over. Cheng felt unusual movement behind his back. Something huge, but at the same time powerful, fast, and flexible was sneaking up on him. Gotta stay cool-headed. Because, for the combination of water and white mold to work on a person, one more main ingredient is needed: the heart of a creature constantly feeding on mold. And now Chung had to get the heart of exactly such a creature. He drew his dagger, preparing to repel an attack, and if the chance arose, to instantly rush into a crushing attack himself. And Chung needed to defeat a giant insect, something like a centipede, which was already sneaking up on him from behind, counting on easy prey and quietly clicking its mandibles. System message again. The Hall of Eternal Cold and Darkness is inhabited by unique monsters. Gotta kill as many creatures as possible without letting them get out. And the nightmarish centipede was already ready for battle. Chung was struck not only by the abilities, but also by the size of the monster. He'd never had such a dangerous opponent. Here's the mutant's first attack, arching with its entire huge body. It made a swift lunge forward, trying to grab Chung with its deadly mandibles. However, the insect's main strength wasn't in attack at all. The armored shell can't be pierced with a dagger. All of Chung's counterattacks glanced off, causing no damage. The monster orients by vibrations and hearing. Vision due to constant presence in the darkness of dungeons is poorly developed. Gotta use this, Chung decided. He gathered his strength, prepared a new attack, and delivered a series of accentuated strikes to one spot. The effect was still 0. Gotta use abilities, he decided. Already familiar sensations seemed to envelop the hero's body and mind. The world around slows down, senses sharpen, perception changes. The dragon's eye makes Chung's eyes golden. Again, on the two-dimensional image, a shaded area appeared near the insect's head. Chung discovered the centipede's weak spot. Chain hid one of the daggers in its sheath and focused on attacking the right point. He closed in with the monster, managed, and in a couple elusive movements literally mounted the centipede. Jumping on the insect's back, Chung gathered all his strength and with one powerful blow, drove the dagger into the opponent's body all the way to the hilt. It seemed Chung acted flawlessly, but he was confused by how the dagger entered the insect's body. Having pierced the top layer, it met no resistance. The dagger pierced emptiness. Cheng didn't even have time to really understand what happened when the monster sharply arched and he crashed into the dungeon ceiling with such force that stones rained down. Cheng lost consciousness. Coming to, he felt a salty taste of blood in his mouth and heard a series of system messages: internal organ damage, centipede bile poisoning. A whole series of system messages went one after another. 3 ribs broken, spinal fracture, blood loss. He remained conscious only thanks to the ability, cold-bloodedness. However, soon the nature of the messages changed to positive. You remain conscious, immunity to poison gained, resistance to pain shock gained, berserk ability gained. Cheng, despite all the injuries, was not only already on his feet, but was conducting a new attack on the centipede, this time striking the vulnerable spot from the side of the insect's belly. Now his lunge reached the goal. Cheng was doused with a whole fountain of sticky, thick, blue blood. He kept driving the dagger deeper, and the terrible victim was already beating in death throes. Cheng sprawled on the dungeon floor next to the defeated monster, and a system message announced receiving a reward for killing an invincible opponent. He already knew what reward was being discussed. Gathering his last strength, Chung threw off his mask. He saw before him the cold and wet dungeon floor overgrown with that same white mold. Cheng scooped up a handful of mold. Just staying conscious already required incredible efforts, and every movement echoed with sharp pain throughout his mutilated body. Slowly, he brought his hand to his mouth and began to greedily consume the disgusting-tasting mold. Not minding its revolting taste, Chung, however, felt a surge of vitality. The pain subsided. His body began attempts to digest the unfamiliar food. Couldn't hesitate for a second. The second and main ingredient needed to be consumed immediately. Cheng approached the centipede's corpse. He ripped open its belly and pulled out a huge, still warm and pulsating heart. Now he'd gain abilities that would make him invulnerable. Greedily consuming his terrible meal, Chung thought about how much his body would strengthen and how to use the newly acquired abilities of darkness and cold. At the forum at the same time, a dialogue took place between Bill and the unlucky Ararog newbies. He just couldn't wrap his head around how a solo player dared attack his people. They, having knelt before him in a respectful bow, explained the details of what happened, of course presenting themselves in the most favorable light. In their version, Chung was just a simple brawler. Bill's face acquired a stern expression. Jaw muscles played. He asked again whether this upstart in a mask knew that they were under the patronage of his team. Having received another affirmative answer from his charges, he decided to find Chung at all costs and explain good and proper what happens to those who challenge Ararog. Turning his back to the disgraced recruits, Bill resolutely headed to the forum exit. Despite his anger, he was very interested in this unusual solo player. In the dungeon, Chung was experiencing the effect on his body of the remedy for mold and the mutant insect's heart. He knew the effect would be powerful, but couldn't expect such a strong impact. Cheng felt how the broken ribs were fusing. The process, which under normal conditions would take several months, was now happening in a matter of seconds. Torn muscle fibers also healed right before his eyes. A system message sounded. He received enhanced regeneration abilities. Frost Seal Effect. The sensations of healing a body damaged in battle were very pleasant. Chung not only replenished and increased the body's strength, but also experienced physical pleasure from the process. But can't indulge in rest for long. A holographic monitor appeared before Chung, with which he familiarized himself in detail with his character's increased characteristics. The main problem remained using magic. Remembering the principle, the skill you use grows, Chung still couldn't solve his magical problem. This also reduces the capabilities of the dragon's eye. Since dragons are incredibly magically gifted creatures, many of their abilities are tied to skillful sorcery, which is far off. Ching analyzed using the cold-bloodedness skill in level A, remembering how he used it to withstand the hail of arrows. Not bad for the first time, he decided. In the duel with the centipede, Chung received terrible damage, but also managed to bring the battle to victory. As a result, came to the conclusion that his actions were close to perfect. However, he was capable of more, got to make decisions much faster. A smarter opponent would have used his injuries and wouldn't have given him a chance to recover. Still, for now, Chung had every reason to be proud of himself. A satisfied smirk involuntarily stretched his lips. He was gradually starting to believe in the success of his crazy venture. But resting on laurels was premature. He's at the very beginning of the path. It'll be much harder ahead. Chung, as a sign of readiness to continue, pulled the mask on his face again. Ironically, the next monsters Chung encountered on his path were far from being as formidable. The system reported killing 133 bats in level B and 1 centipede. The bats suffered not at all because of our hero's bloodthirstiness. Chung exterminated them for exclusively practical purposes. He was interested in the fangs of these disgusting creatures, and from each specimen, he could get a whole 4 ingredients suitable for his alchemical research. The smell during this procedure was, of course, horrifying. In advance, Chung prepared and stocked up on a potion from white mold and centipede heart essence, and now was ready to reveal another useful property of this wonderful elixir. It turned out that if you pour the elixir on freshly pulled fangs of cave bats, you can get a substance with another incredibly useful property. After the ingredients react, a powder forms, like gunpowder, only with explosive force exceeding its effect many times over. The chemistry of the obelisk world. After all the necessary actions, Chung collected the obtained explosives in a cloth bag and tightly pulled the strings. Now, our hero is equipped not only with just cold weapons, he prudently secured his explosives on his belt. Now the main thing is that this belt doesn't become a Shahid belt for him. Cynical Chung ironically thought about his prospects. Blue ants were supposed to become Chung's next victims. The system was already giving out information about these creatures. Sizes from 20 centimeters to 1.5 meters, live in colonies, protect the queen at any cost. Besides the queen, the ants will just as fiercely defend their offspring, but won't show aggression if you don't attack first or if they don't see you as a suitable food source. Entering into confrontation with an entire colony of organized giant ants was real madness, but it's precisely in their habitat that the vampiric blade of Burton is kept. Chang pondered his next actions. Gotta get the artifact at any cost, but first worth thinking everything through in detail. To start, gotta understand how the blade got here. Burton, one of the ancient kings of the obelisk world, killing his enemies with his named blade, he literally absorbed their skills and life forces. Many clans still haven't recovered from his tyranny. And most importantly, the blade exists in the obelisk world as the only copy. This is not just a named, but the mightiest artifact. Can't let it slip away under any circumstances. Chung decided that the ant colony should be dealt with using cunning. When such a prize is at stake, no point in tempting fate extra, gotta act for sure. And so, pre-prepared bags with explosive mixture were already flying at the ants. The insects themselves made their fate worse, curiously studying the unusual finds. At this moment, a lighter flame flared up in Chung's hand. He waited for the most convenient situation, when the ants would bunch up as closely as possible to each other. The right moment didn't keep him waiting long, and our hero deftly took advantage of it. Soon, the system was announcing the terrible death of hundreds of blue ant specimens. But most of the ants torn apart by the explosion were young and small. The main forces headed by the queen were in the deep galleries of the colony. Chung drew his dagger. Finishing off the wounded, he started making his way to the inner halls, believing that Burton's blade was in the very depths of the cave network inhabited by the ant settlement. Passing corridor after corridor, Chung finally reached a room with a high vaulted ceiling. Intuition wasn't wrong in suggesting that the main opponent would be waiting for him right here. The ant queen was truly of gigantic proportions. Chung to himself called the centipede giant. Now he realized he'd been hasty with the characterization of the previous opponent. Cheng, even if he were twice as tall, could run between the insect's legs without touching its belly. What can he oppose to this monster? His brain worked with incredible speed. Cheng had barely latched onto an interesting thought when the situation noticeably worsened. The queen discovered him. Now he was becoming a potential victim of Her Majesty. It was high time to rely on intuition. Until now, it had helped Chung a lot. Didn't fail now either. In the queen's hall, there should be a door leading to the treasured blade. The queen, however, hadn't given up on her intentions to feast on Chung, unwilling to understand that this wasn't part of the latter's plans at all. He continued to retreat feverishly, looking for a way out. Finally, Chung noticed the saving door. The problem was that it was located right behind the Ant Queen's back. His brain continued to work at the limit of capabilities. Soon, several throwing knives gleamed between Chung's fingers. If everything works out as he plans, he'll manage to buy time and make a dash for the exit, the young man decided. Several successful throws and the queen staggered. Chung directed his knives strictly at the limbs on the left side of the queen, to undercut and throw her off balance. Taking advantage of the monster's confusion, Chung headlong rushed to the door. For the first time in the obelisk world, he left a direct confrontation, but right now, this didn't bother him at all. He'd already grabbed the door handle when it occurred to him that it might be banally locked, and then he'd be screwed. Luck was on Chung's side. The door turned out to be open. He entered a hall lit by torches radiating mystical greenish flame. At the end by the wall stood a statue of a deity. Looking closely, he saw it was a woman. Amazing, turns out that very Burton, the bloodsucker and devourer of human souls, was a woman. In the statue figure's elegant hands, she clutched a beautiful blade with a glowing edge. The statue's shoulders were decorated with two stone serpents, as if ready at any moment to rush at the uninvited guest. But they didn't scare Chung at all. He came to take the blade and no one could stop him. Chang, without hesitation, grabbed the hilt of the ominous blade, a small effort, and he tore it from the tenacious hands of the stone vampire. Now he had to reveal its true power. From Song's audio recordings, he knew that the blade absorbs the souls of weak players as soon as it comes into their possession, and now an incomprehensible veil enveloped Chung's hand. Though Chung was far from weak, even his strength wasn't enough to withstand the artifact's power. Had to decide on a desperate step. Not only will, but also knowledge is needed for a true hero. The next instant, Chung's left hand was on the altar. In his right was clutched Bathory's blade. Everything showed that he was about to plunge its point into his own hand. The veil around the hand gripping the blade thickened, becoming as if tangible. Chung's left hand continued to rest on the altar. All his movements were precise and smooth. The veil, meanwhile, formed into a clearly outlined spiral and now wrapped around the armed hand, like an intricate bracelet. Chung raised the blade and struck it straight into his wrist. At the same instant, the dagger shattered to pieces, and the magic bracelet formed into something like a toothy maw of pure energy around the hand that a moment ago held the blade. Burton's blade became a material weapon many centuries ago, when the greedy queen didn't want to part with her vampiric power, even after her own death. This ability of hers was embodied in the artifact that devours the soul of each of its new owners, and Chung, having conquered the terrifying blade, was already leaving the ancient vampire's temple. Armed with the new ability, Chung returned much more confidently to the Ant Queen's hall. He wasn't bothered at all anymore that he was immediately discovered by the formidable opponent. The queen, seeing the prey that had recently escaped from her, immediately prepared to deal with the intruder. Despite the injuries inflicted by Chung, she remained a strong opponent. But Chung himself in this fight wasn't going to sit in defense anymore. Having drawn his dagger, he with one powerful jump soared above the queen with the clear intention of getting behind her. Parallel to his movements and maneuvers, he concentrated on the just received vampiric ability. So far, this required colossal energy expenditure from him. Seizing a good moment and literally mounted the monster, Chung strikes the queen with a vampiric touch. The lightning attack was crowned with a precise retreat to a safe distance, being at which he gave an order, addressing more himself. But there was no need for this. The vampiric ability was activated by mental, not voice command. After which we witnessed a terrible picture. The giant body of the Ant Queen visibly withered and decreased in size. All the vital energy that came out of it transferred to Chung. Meanwhile, a system message announced a decrease in morale in the blue ant colony and its gradual destruction. Chung's hand was still shrouded in magical energy. And in Chung's tracks headed the couple already familiar to us from the forum, the red-haired guy with his pretty companion. Now they were descending the spiral staircase into the dungeon. Discovering traces of the battle with the centipede, they continued their path even more animatedly, discussing Chung's impressive successes. The red-haired young man's name was Kier, the girl's Ida. So like this, in heated conversation about the prospects of the new celebrity, the young people reached the initial rooms of the blue ant's lair, completely littered with corpses after the explosion. Ida was amazed by the cleanliness of Chung's work. Huge teams couldn't handle such a number of opponents, but he did everything solo, leaving behind only mountains of corpses. Reaching the Ant Queen's hall, Kerr and Ida saw what the terrible monster had turned into. No matter how they tried, they couldn't understand what could have so withered the unfortunate insect. Kier suggested that Chung probably managed to discover an artifact of extraordinary power. Ida, in turn, leaned toward the version that the queen was destroyed using an unknown skill. Kier plunged into developing a plan to recruit Chung to their team. Once again amazed not only by the combat skills, but also by how bold and unconventional solutions he applies. Here, the couple witnessed a truly unprecedented picture. The blue ant colony, in the literal sense, was fleeing from its dungeons in full force, and they already guessed the reasons for the flight. While Ida and Kier observed the results of clearing the dungeon, Chung himself continued his terror of local inhabitants. An underground scolopendra was next to be unlucky. It also turned into a mummy. With the help of the vampiric skill, Chung gained the ability not only to suck out strength, but also to adopt the abilities of monsters he killed. Message: reinforced skeleton gained. Reaching the end of the level, a holographic monitor appeared before our hero. He carefully studied information about increased characteristics and acquired skills. The reinforced skeleton ability made Chung's body more resilient and increased the body's restorative properties. Now, injuries like in the battle with the centipede don't threaten the hero. Chang continued to study the data on the monitor. Development of the dragon's likeness trait, loading information, progress is 10%. Now the dragon's eye will also become more effective. Next, the system offered Chung to officially register his nickname in the player rating list of the obelisk world. He's got no reason to shine, Chung thought, and responded with a refusal. He saw himself in the table as a nameless incognito character. The lag behind the leaders was huge, about 50,000 points, but his progress was probably in the top positions of the report. Chain pondered how to get closer to the top of the rating. After all, the players there had been working toward their positions for many years. It would be useful to personally meet someone from them. Erwin, Paul, Ida, the trio of the game's strongest characters. Who they are and what they do, how they pump up rating and train skills, Chung acutely felt his inexperience. Cheng's thoughts were interrupted by an incomprehensible noise. He tore himself away from the monitor and turned all into hearing. Could it be that someone was pursuing him throughout the entire dungeon passage? He was surprised. Most likely, they've been following him since the very start of level B. Probably the active actions at the forum and helping Yuki still attracted attention to his person. And choosing the most difficult black door, Cheng made a decision. First action, then analysis of reasons. With a lightning movement, he pulled out a dagger and threw it toward the uninvited guests, but directed the weapon hilt forward. He wasn't sure of the pursuer's intentions and therefore didn't immediately attack them with lethal weapons. This foresight saved Ida's life. The blade hit her right in the chest. The girl was knocked down and thrown against the dungeon wall. She clearly didn't expect such a reception. Chung, meanwhile, switched his non-lethal attacks to her companion, throwing several knives. The red-haired Kier, following behind Ida, had time to prepare to repel attacks. Managing to parry the knives thrown at him, he immediately rushed to help his friend. Having made sure Ida was intact, Kerr pounced on Chung with a hail of accusations. The guy looked really pissed off and poured out reproaches about recklessness and aggressiveness. A villain would hardly behave this way, Chung decided. In turn, he considered it necessary for now only to ask Kerr whether they were following him on behalf of Team Ararog. Kerr replied that they had nothing to do with Ararog and continued his attacks on Chung. Their dialogue looped. Accusations of aggressiveness were replaced by accusations of surveillance. Ida had already recovered from the blow and with downcast head joined the guy's dialogue. Having calmed down and come to her senses, she understood that Chung's actions were an adequate reaction to their game. Ida's appearance brought constructiveness to the guy's previously more emotional conversation. She undertook to explain to Chung their true intentions and why they chose a covert method of action. Perceptive Chang listened carefully, not yet resorting to his special methods of perception and analysis of information. He liked Ida's rationality and consistency. But here, the emotional Kier intervened in the conversation again. Long ceremonies were completely out of character for him. He directly told Chung that they want to invite him to their team. Ida, having correctly caught the thread of conversation with Cheng, immediately realized that her partner's straightforward actions would only distance them from the goal. The girl was right in her guesses. Because already in the next minute, Chung confidently stated that he acts solo and got ready to leave. Kerr rudely detained him, grabbing his elbow. The situation escalated again. Kerr sincerely couldn't understand how Chung could refuse his offer. He's a newbie, albeit a very promising one, while they're players from the top 10 of the Stele world, the elite, and he just walks away. Chang, continuing to maintain external calm, replied that not only does he not know them personally, but he also, in principle, plays solo. Only now did it begin to dawn on ambitious Kier that to Chung, they're nobodies. He didn't hesitate to inform him otherwise, saying that they're like celebrities of the obelisk world. And again, Ida brings a note of rationality. She says that they really should have introduced themselves first, and in general, their conversation immediately went somehow awkwardly. Now that Chung learned their names, the guys managed to interest him. He feverishly thought about what was happening. Ida, third place in the rating. He himself had been craving such an acquaintance. Ida continued that their presence on level B and the offer of joint passage may look a bit strange, but they really need Chung's help. In response, Chung stated that he's absolutely not bothered by the mismatch of their high rating with being on the initial level, but decided to resort to the help of the Dragon's Eye after all. Some features of the eye ability should be explained. The aura of a creature with a positive attitude looks unclouded and clear, revealing the sincerity of its intentions. If the game character seeks to bring evil to Chung, then its two-dimensional projection will be filled with dark hatching, its mood hostile and negative. The auras of both Kerr and Ida are crystal clear, means they not only don't want to lure Chung into a trap, but also speak the pure truth about their goals and intentions. Gotta question the new acquaintances in more detail about their plan, Chung reasoned. Perhaps he'll manage to get from them not only valuable knowledge about the obelisk world, but should accept their offer. Ida continued to lay her cards on the table before Chung, deciding that trust can be earned through maximum openness. She told him that they need an artifact from level E. This artifact can only be obtained by a team of 6 to 7 players, and even taking into account that she and Kerr are players from the top 10, they need the help of at least one more top player. Chane asked Ida a question that had been brewing for a long time. He didn't understand why they didn't attract someone from the old-timers to their side. After all, they know many in the Stele world. Ida answered sincerely and artlessly, revealing that all their acquaintances are in other teams, and attracting them for passage is impossible. It contradicts the rules of their clans. Cheng summed up. Turns out, on level E, there's an artifact they need to get, but even they don't have enough strength and have no suitable allies. Ida answered affirmatively, and continued, revealing that they're interested in none other than the crown of the Lizard King Hakan. Chung, from Song's recordings, knew about this artifact, and it didn't interest him at all. The crown endowed the owner with unique abilities of attractiveness and leadership. It was indispensable for heads of large clans, taking by numbers and organization. Cheng, after his brother was betrayed by his own clanmates, was firmly determined to play in solo mode, entering only into temporary alliances profitable for himself. But he was convinced of Ida and Kerr's truthfulness, as well as the purity of their intentions toward him. No dirty tricks or betrayal to expect, so for him, it's only about profit. Ida just got to the very essence of the question. She offered Chung to choose the reward himself that he'd consider worthy. These were really excellent conditions. Cheng thought about Ida's offer. He'd already internally agreed to this venture. Now, all that remained was to determine what payment to ask for his help. Ida and Kerr froze in agonizing anticipation. Their faces betrayed internal anxiety. Apparently, the crown is really very important to them. Chung came to a conclusion. As a reward, he requested all artifacts, karma points, and other treasures obtained by the team when passing through King Hakan's lair. Chung valued his help highly. The couple easily agreed. They desperately need the crown. Chung confirmed his guess. Kerr extended his hand, saying that now's the time to introduce himself, since he still hasn't done so. Cautious and distrustful, Chung considered it necessary not to reveal his real name yet. If they're friends, then in time everyone will know, he thought. The choice fell on the name Colin. At the entrance to level E, the heroes witnessed an unexpected sight. A dying goblin, choking on his own blood, addressed them, reporting his comrades were killed by someone very strong. Saying nothing more, the goblin died. The space in front of the level gates was completely littered with corpses of other goblins. Colin and his new team were puzzled by what they saw, but none of the players were going to retreat. Gotta achieve the set goals. They confidently stepped inside, immediately landing on a carpet of lush green grass. Bright sunlight blinded the heroes, accustomed to the twilight of dungeons. Squinting, experienced Ida and Kerr told Colin that the obelisk world is divided into outer and inner zones. The inner zone, or dungeon zone, consists of sectors A, B, C, D, and is intended primarily for pumping skills. Often, players advance there level by level. Consisting of all other levels, the outer zone doesn't imply skill pumping. When passing through it, they don't grow, and it's in the outer zone that our trio is now. Their conversation was interrupted by a system message. It announced Colin receiving a mark. They're necessary to confirm one's own abilities, exactly 100 pieces for each. The thing is that marks are very well hidden, and usually it's much easier to take them from other players than to find them independently. Thus, the game provokes participants. Kier, explaining the principle of marks to Colin, pondered the latter's motivation. He, judging by his reaction, wasn't that interested in marks, or it's not the first time he's been to level E. Colin interrupted Kerr's thoughts, reminding him about the task, and reported that he'll collect marks along the way. And Kerr, in turn, noted that their new friend will be impressed by the size of level E. He told that its huge expanses are divided into natural zones. Each of them is characterized by its own type of landscape. In the east, there are high rocky mountains. The west is occupied by endless fertile plains crossed by calm, full-flowing rivers. The climate there is mild and pleasant. In the south stretches hilly terrain with an abundance of herbaceous vegetation. This land is full of herds of herbivorous animals. And the northern expanses are overgrown with dense, impenetrable forest, the thickets of which are inhabited by the most diverse inhabitants. In the center of level E are impassable swamps. The weather there is stuffy and humid, and the air is filled with the smell of rot and decay. Of course, such different ecosystems are inhabited by monsters completely different from each other. Small goblins, for example, never go into the forest wilderness, apparently afraid of encountering the aggressive and strong trolls living there in huge numbers. In the marshy swamps of the central part of level E, you can meet humanoid lizards. The eastern mountain ridges are favored by clans of disgusting malicious orcs, but all these dangerous creatures don't compare at all to the threat coming from other players. Whole gangs of robbers travel through level E in search of marks. Meanwhile, our trio set out on their way heading to the swamps. History takes us to Team Ararog's headquarters. Bill is still puzzled by the question of searching for the stranger who so easily dealt with a group of their recruits right at the forum. In the clan headquarters, Bill, sitting majestically at the table, receives a subordinate's report. They inform him that Ida and Kerr were recently seen in the waiting zone of Level B. Events fell into a logical chain. Apparently, this couple decided to attract the gifted newbie to their side. This is quite far-sighted and smart on their part, Bill decided. Everything shows that the guy's sharp and spirited, besides clearly possesses outstanding combat abilities, an amazing set of qualities, taking into account his inexperience. But he made a big mistake, challenged Clan Ararog, Bill continued, and gave the henchmen an order to sound the general rally. They're immediately setting out to search for the fugitive. Colin was on watch during the halt. Settling by a small fire, he plunged into heavy thoughts. It seemed to him that he'd been in the obelisk world infinitely long already. His gaze was riveted to the night sky. Surprisingly, it differed little from his native earthly one. Gradually, thoughts switched to his new companions. They were strikingly different from other inhabitants of the Stele world. They were open, cheerful, and smiling, amazing qualities for such a competitive and cruel society. Even the way they slept peacefully, completely trusting him, a new and completely alien person to them. And they don't possess the Dragon's Eye ability, can't know his goals. The coherence of their actions in battles is amazing. Kier acts as shield and spearhead. Ida attacks from distance and performs support functions. Perfect synergy. This is clearly not a coincidence. They've known each other for a very long time and definitely formed as fighters within their small team. Their relationship with each other can't be called anything other than perfect. Perhaps, Colin thought, it would be nice to know the guy's past for sure, or at least get more information about them using the Dragon's Eye abilities. However, for some reason, he didn't want to do this at all. They're sincere toward him, and that's enough, Colin decided. But still, this couple is not so simple at all. His watch was coming to an end. Colin was about to indulge in dreams and pleasant memories, but instead made his brain work feverishly again. Strange noise was heard. Loud sounds woke Ida and Kerr, stretching sweetly half asleep. They, being experienced travelers, quickly came out of sleep. Ida spoke first, suppressing a yawn. According to her, a group of strangers was approaching them, but they're still quite far away. She, if no one minds, will deal with them herself. After all, the girl had already fully woken up, and she could use some stretching. Ida spoke about the upcoming battle so confidently and carelessly that it could even be a bit scary. While rational Ida was discussing her actions with her companions in a measured way, hot and decisive Kerr, having snatched his sword from its sheath, swiftly rushed to the nearest bushes. A sweeping attack sent into the air not only the cut tops of the bushes, but a whole fountain of bloody spray. Everything shows that Kerr attacked a squad hidden in ambush. Through the opening cut in the thickets, the hero saw a group of armed people. Their faces were distorted with fear and bewilderment. And Kier, unlike the discovered hapless warriors, showed extreme composure. He moved around the entire perimeter of the battle, striking with his sword with amazing speed. Colin, meanwhile, got distracted by mosquitoes flying near him. The trajectory of their movements seemed unusual and strange to him. And very soon, this found an explanation. Turned out that Ida possessed the ability to control insects, directing tiny helpers to Kier's aid. Having put the opponents to flight, Ida returned to the fire, leaving the pursuit to Kerr. By the fire remained lonely Colin, stubbornly not noticing the danger hanging over him. And the threat was quite serious. Ida was ready to rush to help at any moment when a dagger blade approached Colin's throat.